The union movement is more than simply wages and working conditions. Well, that was terribly important. The idea of 8-hour day and you get paid for overtime. But more than the union movement always been in the fight for women's rights, women's suffrage, for racial equity. People be treated fairly no matter what color they are. Good unions have always fought on these issues to make the quality of our life better, to make our very everyday life, aside from the workplace, better.
Labor history in Illinois represents an experience that is very close to all of us. It's the story of working people and the dramatic events they experienced as they literally built Illinois, and how through their everyday lives they helped to shape and maintain our American form of democracy.
When most people, not just young people, but I think all of us, when we hear about unions, for example, we think about issues like wages and working hours and working conditions. And in fact, unions have been very important in maintaining high standards for American workers. But I think, in fact, that the most important thing about labor organizations might be the role that they've played in democratic politics in the United States. I think that all societies represent various kinds of concentrations of power, and in the case of the United States, unions have historically helped to balance the power of large corporations. It's the way that working people have protected their interests and represented themselves outside of the voting booth. Anyone who's interested in the labor history of the United States can't do better, really, than to turn to the case of Illinois. And the reason is that workers in Illinois seem to always have been at the center of the labor movement and of the labor history of the country. That's not a coincidence. The reason for it is that Illinois has traditionally been one of the most important industrial states in the Union. As a result, Illinois has tended to have a strong labor movement, and Illinois workers have tended to be at the center of Illinois labor history. The roots of industrial work in the United States are in the mid-19th century period. And in the case of Illinois, you can go all the way back to the period of the Civil War and find the roots of the labor movement. A place like Chicago, for example, as early as the period of the Civil War, had quite a strong labor movement, and that is true as well of some of the mining areas in Illinois.
The Civil War had introduced mass production methods to American industry, but 20 years later, millions labored 12, 14, and 16 hours a day. Wages and working conditions were terrible. Demanding change, workers from across the country met in Chicago in 1884 and set May 1st, 1886 as a national day of protest for the 8-hour workday. World labor history remembers the events that followed as the Haymarket tragedy.
On May 1st, 1886, 80,000 workers, it was a Saturday, marched up Chicago's Michigan Avenue for the 8-hour day. On Sunday, May 2nd, about 35,000 workers marched in what is now Grant Park. On May 3rd, a Monday, the first working day of this movement, the workers were locked out at the McCormick Reaper plant on the southwest side. The police came in and they attacked the workers, killing 2 and injuring 28. A protest meeting was held on Lake Street, just a short distance from Haymarket Square, proposing a meeting to be held here at 7:30 in Haymarket Square to protest the police brutality. And instead of 20,000 people that they hoped to get, they only got about 2,500, and many of the speakers didn't show up. When August Spies arrived, he pulled the crowd out of Haymarket Square onto Desplaines Street. 3 people spoke. First Spies, then Albert Parsons, and then Reverend Samuel Fielden. As Fielden was about to close his speech and most of the crowd had left, suddenly the police came from the Desplaines Street police station armed with Colt Lightning revolvers and Winchester repeater rifles. And they came in military formation and pushed the small crowd down toward Lake Street. As Fielden said to Captain Ward that this was a peaceful meeting, then someone unknown to this day threw the first dynamite bomb ever thrown in peacetime in the history of the world. It came from that corner, it flew through the air and landed just opposite the alley, killing one policeman, Matthias Deegan, and injuring many others. In the confusion, we believe many policemen shot their own men. Many of the crowd also was injured. We know at least 4 workers were killed. Many dragged their friends and relatives away, fearing harassment by the police.
Chicago business leaders of the day seized upon Haymarket as a chance to crush the labor movement and used their power to influence one of the most unjust trials in American history. Hundreds of labor leaders were arrested following Haymarket, but 8 men, mostly German immigrants who represented a broad cross-section of the labor movement, were put on trial, and 4 were eventually hanged, despite the fact that none of them could be linked to the unknown bomb thrower. August Spies, Albert Parsons, Adolf Fischer, and George Engel were led to the gallows on Black Friday, November 11, 1887. A 5th condemned man, Louis Ling, died mysteriously in his jail cell.
This is the courtyard behind the old Cook County Courthouse where the execution took place. The gallows were set up just a short distance from me here, while 200 businessmen sat in chairs. They were given special engraved invitations to watch what one businessman proclaimed the end of the American labor movement. The last words of Albert Parsons would be, "Let the voice of the people be heard." Then the trap was sprung a few minutes before noon.
Carved into the base of this monument to the Haymarket martyrs are the last words of August Spies. "The day will come when our silence will be more powerful than the voices you are throttling today." Because of the issues raised in the Haymarket tragedy, many people today see this monument as a shrine to the U.S. Bill of Rights.
The issues were freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, which they were denied, the rights of minority groups, and other minority groups can relate to that. The Germans were the minority group at that particular time. And the right of workers to have free democratic trade unions, which was being denied to them at the time. And of course the issue of the 8-hour day, which they were fighting for. So these were the real issues that can bring people together. Even minority groups of today can bring them together and see the symbolism of this particular spot.